UVA Darden.
The first 10 years is more of the what. After that, it's more the how. Suddenly, the what becomes the accountability of the people below you, and it all comes down to how do you manage people, organization, and how do you communicate.
CEO Voices, Leading with Communication, examines the communication that enables transformational leadership. In this episode, we speak with Scott Price, CEO of DFI. Scott shares his extensive career journey and insights on leadership, communication, and cultural understanding. He also reflects on his personal experiences at Darden and how they shaped his approach to leadership and communication.
Scott Price, thank you for joining us for CEO Voices, Leading with Communication. Steve and I know how passionate you are about effective communication dating back to your days as a Darden student. So would you right now introduce us to DFI, this massive and diverse retail enterprise that you've led now for the past year? A lot of complexity, a lot of diversity there, from the businesses themselves to the markets and consumers you serve, to the vast supply chains that make it all possible. Tell us a little bit about DFI.
Thanks, June. Good to see you again, and Steve as well. So DFI is probably the largest unknown retailer in the world. We have 11,000 stores across 13 countries. We're across 5 banner types, formats, which are food, convenience, health and beauty, home furnishing, and quick service restaurants. We have a lot of well-known brands in our portfolio: 7-Eleven, IKEA, Starbucks, just to name a few. We have roughly 200,000 team members, $30 billion in revenue, and quite a significant sourcing and supply chain, obviously, to feed that very large number of customer touch points across all the markets in Asia. But yes, complex, but the nature of retail is you buy, you move, you sell. It sounds simple, but it's really hard to get it right.
Scott, you've had and thank you for that, by the way, but you've had an incredible career journey going back to your early days at Coca-Cola and then assuming leadership roles at DHL, Walmart, UPS. And you've been in interesting spaces. You've been in growth spaces. You've been in customer care spaces. You've been in innovation spaces, transformation. Can you give us a quick overview of your journey, your leadership journey, and in particular, also, if you don't mind, a little bit about the role of communication and leadership communication in shaping your career?
Well, it all begins with Darden. I was a mid-level manager in a hotel, and I realized that hospitality was not for me. So my boss was a Darden grad, and I had a course from an international business undergrad. And the combination of that was, go forth and get an MBA and learn a language. So I did the joint degree program at Darden under the tutelage of the famous Leslie Grayson, who passed recently. But, when you are learning executive communication at Darden and you're learning a second language at the same time, communication is top of mind. And you are continually stressing on how to get ideas across. And so, I finished Darden with, I think, an appreciation for communication in the sense of how you form it. Probably it took several more years before I began to really appreciate the time and effort that's required for strategic communication. The the communication of day in and day out business life is quite simple, and part of that is your personality. But to create followership, in particular followership when you are tasked with putting forward change quickly, that it may not be fully supported in the organization, really does come down to the framing and the delivery of very effective communication. And, if I were to, think through the most recent here in DFI, COVID was very hard on Asia, compared to the US, much more of a strict regime around lockdowns. And, we had team members who had to go into work every single day. And then as COVID relaxed and the rest of the world moved on, it became very clear we had a lot of folks who were still kind of living in that mindset. And, I jokingly called it therapy, but basically it was communication, which was to let everyone know how much we appreciated what they had done, but the time was now to move forward, that our customers were quickly readapting to life and the organization needed to readapt to life. We had to get out of crisis mode and get back into strategic growth mode. And, that was all around communication. That was all around changing mindsets. And I think, over my career, if I were to look at several important pivots, at the heart of it was the ability to communicate to large numbers of people a direction and rally support to move in that direction.
Yeah, Scott, that's a great segue to my next question, which gets to this point. You've been with some major brands throughout the course of your career, all of which at one point in their history, if not still today, were considered disruptors, transformers, industry shapers. And to that point, you've been in the heart of that action and leadership roles in disrupting and also protecting against disruption, if you will. As you look at sort of the meta arc of your career and some of the challenges that you've faced, are there any specific moments that you credit with perhaps helping you amp up to the position where you are today at DFI that's really prepared you for this role? Because again, you're in a very disruptive space at this moment in time.
I'm asked often, from individuals who like the appearance of my career, how did you do it, and how should I do it? First off, I'm not sure how I did it. So how in the world can I guide anyone else on doing it? I never set out to work for any of these companies. And so, I in essence give three pieces of advice. The first is you have to take risks. And to your question, Steve, it was at that pivot points of taking risks in my career that represented the biggest challenge and the biggest reward. So moving out of Coca-Cola into DHL, I didn't know logistics, but I was hired to lead the Japanese business because I knew Japan and I could speak Japanese. And I had to learn logistics very quickly. Leaving logistics DHL and going into Walmart was a huge task. Walmart has a lot to do with the leader that I became. Doug McMillan, who's now chief executive, when he hired me, he said, we'll teach you retail, help us build Asia. And, I fell in love with retail, and the culture of Walmart also being part of it. So, that first piece of advice, you have to take risk because it's in those risks I learned. The second piece of advice is you got to learn what your stress behaviors are, and you've got to learn how to manage them, right? Everyone has stress behaviors, and they can be reelers if you don't figure out how you manage physiologically your stresses. Me, just ask my wife and daughters, genetically impatient. It caused more angst in my life than necessary. In fact, I just figured out earlier, just stop talking. If you feel it, just stop talking. That that is important, that you understand yourself well enough to understand your strengths of getting things done for me over-indexed as your weakness, which is then an impatience when things aren't moving quickly. And then the third is a rather unfortunate piece of advice, which is despite all of the great effort and energy, it still comes down to being in the right place, the right time, with the right resume, and knowing the right people. And, I've met so many people who I just thought should have been a great chief executive and never had the opportunity. And it wasn't because they weren't good enough. It's just that mix of that right place, right time, it just didn't happen. And so, you gotta, if you're so single-minded on that one, you're probably going to derail yourself. If you go into it with an idea that, you're going to take some risks and lifelong learning, you can have a lot of fun. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You should still finish your career at some point satisfied that you've done well.
Great advice.
Well, Scott, it looks like you were in the right place at the right time, knowing some great people as you landed in Hong Kong at DFI. What were your immediate priorities coming into that position in August? And how did you go about communicating your leadership style, taking the risks, learning about your stress relievers, being in the right place at the right time? And how did you communicate this across the company?
So, June, I was lucky in as much that I accepted the job on the 1st of February, but my daughter was getting married on the 12th of June. And there was no way that I was going to sort of discount that process. So made the agreement that I was going to start on the 15th of June, 3 days after the wedding. And we weren't going to announce till the 1st of May, which meant that I was able to do a lot of very quiet research on the organization. And through some introductions, talk to individuals who had been separated from the business or had left the business at a senior level. And what became clear to me was that the business strategy had pursued growth across too many dilutive avenues. The stock price was down 70%. The culture of the organization was not, I felt, appropriate for retail. Retail, your front line have to feel loved. And it really wasn't doing that. And, I like the saying that the culture of an organization is simply the behavior of leaders around its values. And one of our values is respect, and everyone looks upward. And that's what respect looks like. And if that's not terribly respectful, it changes the culture of the organization. And I think the final was that in our effort to try and move forward quickly, we lost connection with our customers. The most extreme example I had within the organization is I had a very, very competent retailer, but I had a Scandinavian male based in Malaysia making the cosmetic assortment decisions for Muslim women in Jakarta. And you're so far from the customer in that situation. And, the organization shouldn't have asked him to do that. So when I arrived, I was able to hit the ground because I had already decided upon the strategy statement, which is customer first, people led, and shareholder driven. Within each one of those buckets, root causing and addressing some of the problems that I discovered in that process. And began I called it a tiki tour, which was all around communication, which was getting to all 13 of the markets, speaking across multiple cities to frontline team members, the support centers, and talked about what the future could be, but that we needed to satisfy shareholders while at the same time winning with our customers and the role that they played. And it's been quite successful, in the sense that we're gaining market share. Our revenue is greater than the market average. Obviously, gaining share. It's tough out here in Asia relative to the impact of the China economy on, in particular, North Asia, several of the markets that we operate in, as well as Southern China, where we have the 7-Eleven franchise and some others. But in general, there is a better, I think, tone in the business as a result of all of this. Changed out the leadership team. I think there's only 2 of the 10 reporting to me. When I joined, I had no female direct reports, which just blew me away in retail. When 60% of your customers are female, how in the world do you make decisions without that voice? We're now 40% female, but I think we need to be probably 50%.
Scott, as I listened to you, I was just thinking that the issues that you were talking about, we all face those same issues in any organization or corporation that we're working in, wherever it is, in Hong Kong, in Charlottesville, in New York City, or Atlanta. Steve and I have interviewed a lot of CEOs over the past 4 years in this podcast series, and I don't believe we've ever had a CEO who has spent as much time working in international markets as you. Can you tell us what the biggest leadership and communication learning you've taken away from your life as a corporate expat?
Yeah, I have loved 30 plus years as an expat. It is a dying breed because my generation began at a time when in many markets in the world, you did not get Western business-oriented skill sets. Nowadays, you've got as many American MBAs outside the United States as you have inside the United States. Mm-hmm. So the premium that you pay for expats is hard to justify. And so, I've loved it, but I'm very careful myself about allowing expats into the business because they're expensive. So it's a development investment. At the same time, you need to be making sure that you are getting much better than you could have possibly got in the local market. So expats in themselves, I think, are a unique but reducing percent of the work population outside the United States. In terms of my experience and what it taught me, the reality is that the cultures of the world are very different and very powerful. And when you're trying to create a consistent transformation based upon a company culture that does not acknowledge the local culture, you're going to get into trouble. And what I advise new expats as they go in is to quickly figure out 3 things. So the first is, how is conflict resolved? Conflict in Asia, for example, is resolved very differently in Japan versus Thailand versus Australia, very wildly different. And if you don't understand how that conflict is resolved, you will be less fluent as a leader, as a problem solver. The second is understand how influence is gained and leveraged. And that's particularly important in North Asia, which is a very hierarchical, age-based. And if someone of youth, you could have a 50-year-old leader talking to a 57-year-old subordinate, but if they're not speaking with the right level of respect, they'll lose the followership of the 40-year-olds. And you'd never think about that in a maybe a Western work environment, but very critical in North Asia, that you have to be very thoughtful around that influence that comes from the national culture. And then the third is identify who seems to be getting things done the best and how are they doing that. And if you can, within 6 to 8 weeks, figure out those 3 things, you've got a much better success chance in terms of your own change agenda as an expat than if you come in and blindly assume that everyone understands the American, and I've worked for a European company, or the European way of getting things done, and you cause quite a bit of resistance unnecessarily. And so culture is really important. Frankly, I'd say the same 3 things fit. If you're an American and you leave one company and go another company, And I'd say those same three things are important for understanding a corporate culture, even within the same national culture, because company cultures are very, very different. And you have to ascertain those sort of three aspects to be able to figure out your own guardrails and your own effective path forward.
Scott, in your three lessons, you touched on cross-cultural communication, at least some of the outcomes, positive outcomes from effective management of cross-cultural communication. As you know, as a Darden alum, it's something that we teach quite a bit throughout our curriculum, both in the communication function, but across all the disciplines, with the case study engagement. Given that, and given the fact that this is a space that you've lived most of your career in, having to communicate across cultures, and also you're talking about having your own self-awareness, and then perhaps some weaknesses, like perhaps your from time to time lack of patience, for say. How have you dealt with that personally as a leader from a cross-cultural standpoint? How have you held how have you become a better listener? How have you become perhaps more tolerant? And what did you take away from that experience that others that have an interest in leading multinational corporations, or at least spending a good portion of their career working international markets, could learn from?
So, if I could go back and give myself advice upon starting Darden, I would tell myself the following. The first 10 years is more of the what. After that, it's more the how. So even though I don't know what the course is called now, organizational behavior was when I was there. It's basically the psychology of management. I don't know what we call the course in Darden now, OB at the time, and communications. Keep all your notes, because 10 years from now, those will be the most important things. Because suddenly the what becomes the accountability of the people below you, and it all comes down to how do you manage people, organization, and how do you communicate.
As you're leading these transformations, I would assume that as the leader, you have to have built a trust with them to move forward.
Yes, but June, I believe trust as a word has become abused. I believe people claim trust undeservedly. I believe people aspire to build trust overnight based upon a resume, etc. I like the saying that trust is the truth well told over time. And I didn't arrive with an agenda here and immediately get trust. There are probably parts of the organization today at DFI who don't completely trust me, in the sense that, we're a for-profit, publicly listed company. There are no guarantees. We have a complex portfolio. We may have to simplify. So, I'm careful with the phrases that I use. And what I say to everyone is that I can't guarantee that the portfolio won't change. But you can trust me that if there's a change, you will be treated fairly and respectfully. Mm-hmm. And I'm careful on where I say they can trust, so that I am able to always deliver on that truth. And I believe over time that consistent behavior around those words will develop trust in me as a leader. And I think that the idea that, you're going to trust my strategy, or, I just think the word needs to be a little bit more strategically used, because it's become too much of a catch-all of, the opposite of trust is that you're disloyal. And it's, to me, that's the wrong way to think about it. So I think trust is critical. I think you have to earn it. I think it takes time. I think you have to be strategic around how you want to be trusted. And then back to the whole theme here, communicate the heck out of it. And eventually, yes, you will end with trust.
Scott, that sounds like a great onboarding pep talk that you would give to an MBA that you just hired. and I know you've hired a bunch over the course of your career, will continue to. What specifically, what kind of leadership attributes are you looking for in this new crop of MBAs coming through? And where would you say communication fits into that spectrum?
Back to my earlier point, Steve, the first several years of your career is more the what, then it becomes the how. There needs to be signs of life in your how. I mean, if you come in from day one and your what is all around murdering your peers, then, there's no hope that there's going to be a great how at some point in the future. And so, I think it's a handshake on both sides.
You spoke very fondly of your experience at Darden and the importance of the organizational behavior class. We now call it leading organizations. And your ANC class, which I believe it was called back then, which we now call leading with communication, leadership communication. In addition to those two, can you think back to your time at Darden for our students who are listening on just some of the memorable moments that you conjure up and think about when you think about Darden?
Yeah, oh God, there were so many. Because again, I think the Darden faculty probably becomes immune to the impact of the average first student experience that comes from normal life to being thrust in this high pressure, highly intellectual, competitive yet friendly environment. I mean, I can remember the first day of every single one of my first year classes. I remember, my seatmates around me in my first, we were section C. It's funny, I mean, just probably 2 years ago, somebody who sat next to me, we were sitting in a cigar bar in Atlanta having a cigar and reminiscing 30 some years later, right? I mean, that it's that intense, the experience. And it had an impact upon me in the sense that, one, it was sobering that, gee, maybe I'm not the smartest person in the room, because look, you get through the kind of undergrad, et cetera, have a feeling pretty confident in yourself. And that's a good reminder that there are going to be lots of people smarter than you. I think the second was the energy that I got out of the competitiveness of wanting to do well. And, how do you articulate in that kind of an environment? And I think the case study is an excellent example of the boardroom, the management committee room, which is how do you further the discussion and how do you participate in an effective way?
Scott, just want to wrap it up with one final question here. It has nothing to do about DFI or your career journey, but probably everything to do about you and the makeup of your own psyche here. What does, you're a busy guy, lead a very complicated life. How do you unwind? How do you refresh? I mean, or maybe said another way, maybe make it a little more simpler for you, is what does the perfect weekend or vacation look like for Scott Price?
So, I have been blessed with an incredible wife and partner. And, there is absolutely no way anything that I have been able to achieve and at this point in my life with two very well-adjusted daughters who love me and will talk to me is due to the support of my wife, because we moved every 2 years practically for 30 years. And Shizuko was either getting ready to move or helping us settle in for that entire period. And so, that requires a level of investment in a relationship that today a perfect weekend first involves her. Because that is the person who I spend time with that gives me sort of calmness, relaxation, and fun. The second is I love history. And so years ago, I guess basically this just makes me a habitual shopper. But I started a collection of presidential documents signed by every president while they were in the White House. So there's some challenges. William Henry Harrison was the hardest because, of course, he was only in office 30 days, and most of his documents are in the Library of Congress. And so I finally finished that up. Then I decided to get a book from every library of every U.S. president with some signature or designation in it. And so I like surfing auctions while I'm at the beach. That to me is a perfect weekend. Surfing auctions at the beach with my wife.
Fantastic. Scott, thank you so much. Been a very enlightening and additive conversation. We certainly appreciate everything that you brought to us, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. It's just wonderful, wonderful advice for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's always great to reconnect with Darden, the beginning of my career. It was the springboard by which all things became possible, and enjoy the fact that 30-some years later, maybe I can share a few nuggets to help the next generation.
CEO Voices examines the communication that enables transformational leadership. June West is Associate Professor of Business Administration and co-founder of the Darden Leadership Communication Council, along with her colleague, Steve Soltis. Soltis is the former head of executive communication at the Coca-Cola Company and lectures at Darden. This podcast is a production of the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.